Hey guys, how you doing? Just on my walk home from a friend's place, and my brain is thinking about Neofeudalism. Some people think about sports or cars. I think about Neofeudalism. One of the major hallmarks of our era is that all of our institutions are completely corrupted, right? Our banking institutions, our businesses, our democracy, without a doubt. But also our educational facilities. Our educational facilities are not geared to educate anybody. They're vocational. They're places where people go get a little piece of paper so that they can get a job, right? It's not to educate anybody. It's not to know anything. It's not to keep hidden or forgotten pieces of our history sequestered or protected. It's specifically so that you can go get a job, probably as a fundraiser more than anything. And because of this destruction of our educational facilities and the corruption of them into essentially just capitalist boy clubs, the following point will never be said by any person in the educational field, right? You're never going to hear a professor say it. You're never going to hear any of this, which is very straightforward. We are not living in a capitalist era. The capitalist era is actually over. That all collapsed with the passage of this new legislation under the Trump administration. It had been already happening, but there does come a point where eventually you just need to declare that it is over. Capitalism is no longer the system by which Western nations have organized themselves. It is no longer the system that is prevalent. The system that is prevalent now is something more akin to feudalism. And so I have given it the label. I shouldn't say I have given it the label. There's plenty of commentators on the internet that are calling it what it is, which is Neofeudalism. That our governments exist specifically to maintain this feudalist structure that has been erected. Now, you could attempt to make the argument that there was a period of time where we had structured our society to be a capitalist one, where there were a handful of landowners and a handful of wealthy people who had actually seized control of the society. But there's this myth that was going on, and it wasn't actually a myth, I shouldn't be like that because so much land was distributed into what would be called the peasantry, right? The deal was that if you came from overseas and you settled here in America, you got upwards, in some places, 360 acres of land for your own. And this is where the modern conservative movement still finds its feet. These guys who pretend like they got everything by themselves through hard work, when truly they are the beneficiaries of the largest government handout in the history of the nation that happened right near the beginning, right? These ranchers and farmers that are on family land, well, how do you think their family got that land, right? You can look it up. The Canada Dominion Act, you can look it up. And so when you're in that kind of situation where you are a landowner because of the largest government handout in the history of the nation, you can defend capitalism as a system. But because of how capitalism is structured, right, it's just like monopoly. Eventually, all of this land and all of these goods and all of these assets eventually get bought up by the largest person at the table, right? This is why the billionaire class is making money hand over fist during this pandemic, because they're the only ones that actually own anything. And eventually, people like Bill Gates will just leave the market, and it'll be people like Elon Musk, it'll be people like Jeff Bezos, and as the game continues, there'll be less and less billionaires because each billionaire will eat up every other billionaire. And this And so and of course, as they buy power in the government, and as the government simply becomes a reflection of the billionaire class, the idea that capitalism is actually functioning as a system goes away, right? And for people who are willing to call it for what it is, such as myself, I'm going to call it Neofeudalism. Elon Musk might as well be a king, right? Jeff Bezos might as well be a king. They're not situated as nations are situated, right? The national governments have just been bought up by people like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos. They're not the kings of old, which is why it's called Neofeudalism, right? The kings of old, like the King of England, had jurisdiction over England, and that's how the negotiations were put. Whereas Elon Musk has jurisdiction within what may as well be the nation of Tesla, right? And wherever he puts up a Tesla place, he has the jurisdiction to be the little king of, the little tyrant of. And he can negotiate with national and state governments, but because he has such an overwhelming amount of money, he generally will get what he wants. And if he's not getting what he wants from the governor or the prime minister or the president or whoever, then he will fund politicians in order to get his way. And so the entire structure collapses and has collapsed into something resembling feudalism. We are workers. We work for a corporation. That corporation is owned by a private tyrant. And he might as well be called the tyrant, because what he says goes. And if he wants something to happen and he's not getting his way, then he will do things to punish his peasantry. Like Jeff Bezos has removed people's health care because they are demanding better wages and better rights and things like this, right? Jeff Bezos is like an evil king of yore, right? And it won't be too much longer when it becomes just blatantly obvious that this is the case. Like, people like Bezos and people like Musk are eventually, if they haven't already, are eventually going to just fund their own private militias, right? We already know that there are privately run mercenary groups that have a significant amount of power. Like groups like Blackwater, who then became like Z, who rebrand their names so that they don't need to, so that they're not easy to recognize by the populace. That's one of the great tactics used by corporate entities, is that once a corporate entity gets a bad name, they just rebrand, change the name, confuse the populace so that the populace doesn't know who is who or what is what. Which, in my view, is why corporations are dangerous in the first place, right? Corporations are dangerous because they can confuse you very easily simply by changing their name. And so instead of buying, I don't want to buy from Blackwater. Those guys are crazy mercenary types who will kill babies. Oh, sure, I'll buy from this Z. I've never heard of them. I'll give them a shot. They're the exact same group. They've just rebranded themselves. And you're too busy, and it's too confusing to follow. So you just go along with it. Because you don't really have a choice, right? We have this illusion of choice in our society. But the reality is that all power flows to a small handful of people. And this ridiculous narrative that comes out of people's mouths, this ridiculous idea that, oh, well, if you want to be a capitalist, you can just buy in, right? Just work hard, buy the property, and you too can then be a capitalist. As if this is like arguing that, like, oh, you don't like slavery? Well, then you need to buy some slaves and be the master, right? Same sort of argument. But it's also patently ridiculous. Like, 80% of the shares that exist in the society are owned by 1% of the populace. That might as well be the aristocracy right there. The rest of the 20% is owned by the top, 30% of the society, and the bottom 70% of the society has nothing. And the 20% of shares that is spread out in the top echelon of the society, like, it's such a meaninglessly low amount of of shares that it doesn't possibly affect what's going on. Like, when the medieval kings, like the actual feudal lords, were existing, there was a certain section of the population who had these meaningless titles bestowed on them, right? You could be the keeper of the swans, the keeper of the cups, right? It didn't confer anything except prestige. It didn't confer anything to you, really. But there it was. You could have it. And if these guys walked around being like, well, if you don't like the king, then you just need to get yourself a title, right? You just need to be a lord. Like, and as if that's some kind of solution. And this is what we're facing these days, right? If you're like a worker and you're working for one of these corporations, you are a serf, right? You can get up to be like an administrator or a manager, right? But you're still in that, like, you're a foreman, basically. You're still in that serf category. And if the feudal lords who own your business decide to sell that business, well, they sell you along with it, which is exactly how feudalism operated, right? That you couldn't own the serfs directly. They couldn't be slaves. They were bound to the land, just like I'm bound to my business. But if you sold the land, you sold the serfs with them. And so this is where we're at. And capitalism has collapsed. And it's obvious that it's collapsed because the government, like in a proper capitalist society, if we were ever a proper capitalist society, if a business failed, it would collapse. And the other capitalists and the other businesses would buy up their assets, right? Would like vultures on a corpse, gather up whatever power they could from the fallen. That hasn't happened in my lifetime. Any time that there is a capitalist crisis, because that's what capitalism does, it generates crises for itself. Anytime that there's a capitalist crisis, they're bailed out. That the serfs, through their taxes, bail these places out. Right? That's not capitalism. That's not how capitalism should function. That's more akin to what? Feudalism. And so, as we're living through this neo-feudal period, like, the most frustrating part about it is that because our media is bought by these capitalists who want you to believe in the narrative that they spread around, the lie that they spread around, they want you to believe that, oh, if you work hard and put your mind to it, you too can be a capitalist. No, you can't. No, you can't. You're never going to get $600 billion. You're never going to compete on this kind of level, right? You're going to grind your life away for them as a complacent serf. And at the end of your life, when you retire, they maybe give you a gold watch and kick your ass out the door. And unless we actually start admitting to each other and admitting to everyone around us that what we're experiencing is not any system other than a feudal system, a neo-feudal system, nothing's ever going to get better, right? We have to admit what we are. We're serfs. We have to admit who these CEOs and these corporatists are, right? They might as well be lords and ladies. Pretending otherwise, I just think, is delusional. And we've got to fight back, which is why I'm here, right? So if you made it to this point, and you're not subscribed to these videos, do yourself a favor, subscribe. I do this on the daily. This is my day off, so I decided to do 2 today. Make sure you hit the like button. Hitting the like button tells the YouTube algorithm robot to spread this video around, which means more people see it, which means that it spreads faster. What matters to me the most, though, hit the share button. If you hit that share button and you share this on your own channels, your own social media accounts, that's the fastest way to spread this message around. And we got to spread these messages around to let these corporatists know that we're aware of what's going on. We have to revolt. And hey, my Patreon, if you want to give me some money, make this my full-time job. All right, guys, this is the enemy. I love you all. Good luck. We're going to need it.